Robert,
Yo, what's shaking AC?
toxic franchisees are shaken.
Oh my gosh. It's funny that you mentioned that because I was just listening to Toxicity by System of a Down for anyone who's into music. And I was thinking about this word toxic, and I feel like it's so overused in like society. Toxic masculinity, toxic workplaces, toxic everything, right? But then I was like, sometimes it like actually does really apply. Like toxic franchisees. So it's so providential or serendipitous that you would have mentioned that.
Okay, so back it up a little bit here. Well, you're actually okay. So here's why this is on my mind. It was
Okay.
the topic of the week for 3 out of 4 of our roundtables, and one of the things that came up that I think is actually really important is to be careful that we don't instantly label franchisees as toxic just because of a certain behavior.
Mhm.
Like it's not, to me, it's not really fair to that franchisee if you just start labeling them as toxic. And I remember that back when I was on the franchisor side of things, that like when I was living and breathing it, that if one person started negatively talking about a certain franchisee and labeling them as toxic, now people start treating them a different way because they're thinking they're that way, and it just makes it worse. So my very first point, that on the topic of toxic franchisees, is be careful about the labeling. And I even like, with that being the roundtable topic this week, one person that I thought was super intelligent to bring up said, and she's in the field support role. She's like, what I'm struggling with is that people on my home office team are doing just that.
Ah.
So it's something to be aware of. And I think so. We started the roundtables with, and actually, this I'll ask you this question: what defines toxic behavior? Like when I say toxic franchisee, what kind of behavior comes to mind where you would actually go, okay, yeah, that person's acting toxic, or they're being like a toxicity to the system.
Okay. Well, I've never actually thought of this before. Um, you know, so I don't want to pontificate or philosophize or whatever here. Uh, but if I had to
Philosophi. Okay.
philosophize, there we go. If
Okay.
I had to shoot from the hip, I would say somebody who is toxic to a workplace or an environment or people around them is likely somebody who disrupts or undermines the predetermined culture that is either directly or indirectly established by
Wow.
the people that they're around.
That's actually much more. That's very Robert Bruschi, um, to have that clear of a definition on something.
I just made
Um,
that up, literally.
I know I saw you like looking up, and that's pretty good. Yeah. So in the what I did is in the roundtables, I just said, first of all, let's just put in the chat what words come to mind, what thing, and it was along the lines of that, negativity and but the undermining of the culture. I love that point. Like that's actually, I think that's really strong.
Well, I think it has to be neutral, right? Because negativity doesn't necessarily mean it's toxic. Because if you're in a negative culture and that's the necessity of that culture, then you as a positive person are toxic to that culture.
Fair, yeah. Yeah, so the idea though that somebody is going against the grain with their negativity, and so one of the key points on this part of the conversation I think is really important is, let's just be clear, we're not talking about non-compliance, because it's easy when somebody's not compliant. You start with that conversation about why they have to be in compliance, and then eventually, if you go through your compliance process, and if they don't get compliant after a human to human conversation and some noticing, or notice it like an email reminder, whatever, might go to a default. But this isn't that. This We're talking about when you can't use the franchise agreement because you can't put your finger on it, and so it's like, what do you do?
Yeah. And
So
you could have a franchisee who's negative, but just stays in his own shell. It doesn't actually impact anyone else, you know?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that, yeah, that brings up the question, like, is it a problem? And of course, one of the things that came up about that is, if they are negative and they're not growing their business, well, and then I would argue maybe if they're negative, they're not toxic, right? It's more than what you said, like they're that negativity, or they're is undermining the culture. it's often they're stirring the pot with other franchisees, like, oh, did you see what the franchisor is charging us for now? And, and always against the franchisor. Um, so yeah, because it's more like hard to put your finger on. And I was going to say something else, but I will just pause there.
I mean, I don't hate stirring the pot. I mean, if you don't stir the pot, your sauce is gonna burn, baby.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. There may be times, okay, but in a negative way where they're constantly maybe bad mouthing the franchisor. Like, I guess toxicity also is like I kind of just can't help to think of the word like sneaky behind your back. Like if I have a franchise, I would way rather a franchisee be upfront with me as the franchisor about what they're unhappy with
Yeah.
than them go off and talk about it in behind, right? And create like a cancer that you don't even know is there.
Yeah. And again, it depends on the culture, right? Like I remember when I was working on Wall Street, the culture was very much the stick and not the carrot. Like if you suck, somebody's gonna call you out on it, just because, I say you're fat, you get offended, that doesn't mean that you're not fat, right? Or whatever, right? That's the culture there is like
You
give it
had
to
to
me
go there.
straight
We're
so
just
I
gonna
can improve. But other cultures aren't like that.
let's just put a disclaimer. That was the Robert Bruschi comment, not the AC Angela Cote comment. Okay, keep going.
Anyway, so what I meant to say there was that like it really depends on the culture that you're in. If you are in a stick culture where, rather than a carrot culture, a culture that sort of demands that, you know, uh, then maybe you're not toxic. If you're constantly looking at financial statements trying to figure out what's wrong with a company to make sure that you make a good investment, and there's somebody always saying, "No, this is going to work, this is going to work, this is going to work," and they're ignoring what you should be looking at, then you may be toxic to that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm gonna move on.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I do hear you. I do hear what you're saying. It does totally depend on the culture. But let's make the assumption because in franchising, typically the more successful type of culture is one that is more carrot approach. It is pretty tricky with franchisees
Right.
to go using the stick all the time. So I think we can make that assumption. And another thing that came up is, let's quickly talk about how to deal with that. So, I mean, kind of the most obvious thing is that, let's have a conversation with that person and see what's going on and see if we can get them to come around. And when we talked about that, one of the things that was kind of a key takeaway is that sometimes the person doesn't realize that they are how much they're affecting other people. Like their negativity might not we might think that they're being toxic, but maybe they're just venting and they're being negative, and we just need to have a conversation and get them to come around.
Yep.
Sometimes that happens. Also, I have a really quick, funny tip for you that
Okay, give
I'll
her.
give a shout out to JT Thiessen. This was such a good one. Um, when people start to get, he said, not just negative, but toxic, they're causing trouble, undermining the culture, causing trouble under in the background. He just sends them the resale package and says it seems like it seems like you're not happy here anymore and I can help you sell.
I mean, if there was a coach in his business, they would probably like hate that. They're like, I'm trying to fix this, and you're just like, yep, see ya, you know?
No, I mean, but yeah, we're assuming you've done that. We're assuming
Yes.
you've
Yeah.
tried though. And that brings up one last point is um and I loved the field support roundtable this week because those are the people that have to deal first. They first see the toxicity. So we
Mhm.
talked, what are some early warning signs? And some interesting things came up. Some of the obvious things, like, you hear the negativity, but it was also things like their staff coming to tell you, like, go see them in person and just see what their staff are saying. Like, not, hey, do you like your boss? But like, hey, what's it like to work here? And then they'll often tell you. So we talked about like how the field support teams see it first and then they're usually the one having that initial conversation, but I kind of feel like I should give one last tip before we hop, and that is if you can't default them, just start to make it uncomfortable for them. Start to squeeze on the things that you can squeeze on. They're not invited to, maybe the convention because of their negativity and how that's going to affect people. So basically like the what you would call like the slow drip torture method till the
Or
point where they go out of compliance and now you can default them and work towards
well, there
termination.
is a trend online about quiet quitting, and what you're talking about is quiet firing, you know?
Quite terminating
Yeah.
quite exiting a franchisee.
Yep.
There you go.
Let's wrap it up.
Okay. We
Okay.
gotta wrap it up.
3, 2, 1.
One.
Go
Go
be
be
awesome.
awesome.